Last but not least, the fifth and final supergroup of the eukarya domain we're going to look at are the uniconts. The uniconts include some protists, but they also include two groups that we're familiar with, the fungi and the animals. So the protists in the unicont group are closely related to fungi and animals. This is a recently proposed supergroup, and of course, again, like they've said for every one of these, there is some disagreement as to how this should all be worked out, and I'm sure it's going to change over time. But this supergroup, as it's listed now, the Uniconta, include animals, fungi, and then some protists. Some of the protists include amoebozoans, so some more different kinds of amoebas, and the I cannot say this word, the apisthecants, which include the animals and fungi and a few related protists. The root of the eukaryotic tree remains very controversial and unclear, and like I said, this is science in action. I guarantee you that the phylogenetic trees of all of this are going to change over time, especially now that we have modern tools of genetics and molecular systematics which make it possible for us to gain further information. So it's really unclear whether uniconts separated from other eukaryotes early or late, and this is a very gray area that's still to be worked out. So here we are on our fifth and final supergroup, Uniconta. That's going to include some protists such as these amoebozoans, and then it's also going to include fungi and animals, including you and me. We're going to look at maybe one or two examples, and then that'll be it. One of those subgroups was the amoebozoans, and amoebozoans are amoeba-like or have different amoeba-type shapes. Their pseudopodia tend to be more lobe or tube shaped. So when I think of amoebas, these are the ones really that I'm thinking of, the big kind of blobby types. There's a couple of examples of this that are interesting that we want to look at, including the slime molds. We won't really look at the others, but the slime molds I think are pretty fascinating, so we'll take a brief look at them. Slime molds or mycetozoans were once thought to be fungi because they seem to look and act a lot like different types of fungi, but they are protists, and molecular systematics places slime molds in the clade amoebozoa. So let's take a look at one of these examples. This is a plasmodial slime mold. You may have seen this before in your yard, especially out in your garden, maybe on top of your mulch in damp conditions. Many of the plasmodial slime molds are pretty brightly pigmented, yellow and orange. This one happens to have a cool nickname. It's called the dog vomit slime mold. Its scientific name is Fuligo septica, or it may be pronounced Fuligo septica, F. septica, but its common name is the dog vomit slime mold, and you can kind of tell why. It may look pretty gross, but it's actually a pretty fascinating creature. If you've never read the cartoon XKCD, there's an online cartoon XKCD that's usually all about math and science and kind of geeky subjects. A wonderful cartoon. They've got a funny one about slime mold. I'll leave it up here for you to read, but slime molds are actually pretty darn fascinating. Hopefully I have some clips. I think I put some clips in the Chapter 28 notes folder for the slime mold. I think I have two different ones. Perhaps I only put one in the folder, but you should be able to find a clip about the plasmodial slime mold. The slime mold has a life cycle that involves a couple of different stages. One of those is the feeding stage, where it is that big blob of yellow that you saw where it's moving around, and then the other stage is kind of a reproductive stage where it forms these spore type structures and then releases the spores. There is a combination of reproductive stage and living stage that makes up its life here. At one point in its life cycle, the plasmodial slime mold forms a big mass, that big pile of what we saw there, the big yellow, called a plasmodium. This is the same word, but I don't want you to confuse it with the malarial plasmodium, that particular pathogen that causes malaria, although it is the same word. But this big mass of slime mold is called plasmodium, and the cool thing is it's not multicellular. It's not divided into multiple separate cells. It's one giant cell that has many nuclei, so it's one giant multinucleated mass of crawling slime. It's undivided by plasma membranes, but it does contain many diploid nuclei, and then it extends its pseudopodia and crawls along basically through decomposing material and engulfing food by phagocytosis. So it's like a visible giant amoeba type creature that kind of crawls around in your garden. If you were to put like a camera on it and then speed up that camera footage, you would actually see it kind of moving around throughout your garden. There's another type of slime mold that's similar called cellular slime molds. Cellular slime molds are different in that they are actually multicellular aggregates in which the cells are separated by membranes. So these are individual cells, but they get together and they form this large working group. And the cells feed individually, but they can aggregate to form what's called fruiting bodies when they are ready to reproduce. And this is really odd. It's kind of difficult to say, are they unicellular or are they multicellular creatures? At some point in their life they act unicellular, but then at another point in their life they come together and they form these structures for reproduction to where it's almost a multicellular creature. And this one particular one down here, not even going to pretend to be able to pronounce it, it's an experimental model for studying the evolution of multicellularity. Most scientists think this is how multicellular organisms came to be, starting out with unicellular creatures working together cooperatively and then just staying together and forming multicellular creatures. So here is the cellular slime mold. The difference here is that they are separate cells to begin with, solitary amoebas. Then when they begin to reproduce, when the conditions are right, they all come together. They actually send out chemical signals to basically say, all right guys, come, let's all get together. And they form these fruiting bodies, these structures that release spores. So this is multiple of these little creatures, but they work together to form this structure for reproduction. So at this point they look like unicellular creatures, but at this point it looks like a multicellular creature for this reproductive purpose. Kind of a weird life that it leads. So those are the amoebozoans, part of the Uniconta supergroup, and the amoebozoans are well represented by the slime molds. There's a couple others we're not really going to look at. The fungi, of course, we'll save till later, and the animals we'll save till later as well. That would be the opisthocons. The opisthocons include the animals, such as this cute little guy, the fungi like you see here, and then a couple of other different types of protists. It's amazing to think that this fungus and this dog are more related to each other than some of these other protists are related to the other groups of protists, but if you look at the molecular and the DNA evidence, that tends to be the case. So we're going to leave our 5 supergroups right there. So we have talked about all 5 of the supergroups of the domain Eukarya, and we'll save the big ones like animals and plants and fungi for later. The last part of our chapter talks about the importance of some of these protists, and we'll talk about how they play an important role with the environment and also an important role for human beings. So we'll say goodbye to this adorable cute little puppy, and we'll move on to concept 28.7. Goodbye, Corgi puppy.